So our theme this month is the Sacred Continuum. The question is frequently asked, does prayer really change anything? So here's an example that you might want to consider. There were these three ministers. They were not religious science ministers, but they were ministers. And during a break at their ministers' conference, they were having this discussion about the best positions for prayer. A telephone repairman was working nearby, and he couldn't help overhearing this conversation. Kneeling is absolutely the best position to be in while you are praying, one of the ministers said. Absolutely not, said one of her colleagues. I get the best results by standing with my hands outstretched to the heavens. So the third minister thought about that for a minute, and he said, you know what? You are both wrong. That's why they're not religious science ministers, because we don't say things like that. You are both wrong. The most effective prayer position is lying prostrate face down on the floor. Well, this telephone repairman just could not contain himself any longer. You know what, Revs, he said? The best praying I ever did was hanging upside down from a telephone pole. So here's the message in that. I would venture to say that everybody has some kind of a similar story related to when prayer or prayer treatment or spiritual mind treatment was doggone effective. On the other hand, there are those times when, regardless of the issue, the conditions under which you pray, or the degree of your immediate desire, prayer just doesn't seem to work. It doesn't change anything. Which is why today's topic is prayer. Does it change anything? Our theme this month is the Sacred Continuum. And I've talked about this in the past because I have a great deal of respect and connection for this book written by Stephanie Sorensen about almost 20 years ago now, talking about the Sacred Continuum. But the one thing about a continuum is that even at almost 20 years, it's still valid. And I first heard her and found out about this book at a Religious Science International conference. And this was the theme of the conference, the Sacred Continuum. It was also the title of the keynote address that she did. And I think it's appropriate to say she knows of what she speaks, not only because she is a science of mind minister, but because the truth flows through this book such that it could be as big as the Science of Mind text and not be any more powerful. It's just that good. Continuum, by definition, means something whose parts cannot be separated or separately discerned. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind as I talk now about the use, the value, and the type of prayers. Stephanie reminds us that divine presence, spiritual energy, is present whether we are acknowledging it in prayer or ignoring it as we think and speak in our everyday lives. It's there, always. Actually, it's right here within each one of us. From that, we can deduce that our sacred source, substance, power, is always present and always active. It's never absent from us. We may be absent from it in a manner of speaking, but it's never active. It's always active. It's never absent from us. Even when we are not calling it forth, it doesn't turn off or go somewhere else. So So the space between our formal prayers, or spiritual mind treatments as we typically call them, is just as sacred and just as creative as the prayers themselves. So what that says is we really must grant to every thought and every word the same spiritual value that we assign to our affirmative prayer, to our treatments, or to our creative meditations. Sorensen even encourages us to choose our thoughts carefully and to consciously live our prayers moment by moment, to enhance and to improve our lives. So this month, week by week, as well as moment by moment, we'll address the processes that apply in learning to live the truth we speak of when we do our spiritual practices. And today, as we begin addressing, does prayer or spiritual mind treatment change anything? So those of you who have taken or are taking Science of Mind classes are already aware of the similarities and the differences between the traditionally held meaning of prayer and the meaning of spiritual mind treatment. For those of you who haven't taken classes or took them a long time ago and would like a refresher, let me take just a moment to discuss that. If when we pray, our prayer is a recognition that Divine Spirit is all-knowing, all-powerful, and everywhere equally present all the time, and that we realize our unity with this Divine Spirit is ongoing and present always, then our prayer is the same as a spiritual mind treatment. On the other hand, when we believe that God is some far-off being and we approach Him by wondering if by some good luck we might be able to placate or persuade Him to consider our request, then there is no similarity between this type of prayer and the spiritual mind treatment. Because you see, this creative intelligence, this power for good, is not some superhuman being who cares more for one person than another. This eternal spirit of love and givingness is not predisposed to kindly grant favors one day and dispense cruelty the next. God is a universal presence. It's an impersonal observer, a divine and impartial giver, forever pouring itself into its creation. That's why you hear us refer to God as it, because it is all of the feminine and all of the masculine and all of the personalities that each of us are, and all of the emotions that each of us have. It is all those things, not any single one, or drifting in and out of one after the other. It is the composite. And so it is the masculine and the feminine, and in order to begin to move away from that suggestion of a superhuman, we've moved away from the use of he in our descriptions. And God is not something to be thought of or addressed only when we're in trouble. And similarly, not to be thought of or addressed when we're not. Which is another way of saying it's always available. And as you heard in the Standing in the Light this morning, when we engage it, it is all too happy to be fully present in the progress that we are making with our intentions. So let me tell you a story about these two little boys. One of them was 8 years old, the other was 10 years old. And they were always into some kind of trouble. Their parents knew that if any mischief occurred in this small town where they lived, that their two boys undoubtedly were in some way involved. So the parents were just about to their wits' end as to what to do about their son's behavior before they got any older and it got any more spread. So the mother had heard that there was a minister in town who had been successful in disciplining children. So she asked her husband if he thought it would be okay for them to send the boys to this minister for counseling. Well, the husband thought it was a great idea, and so they scheduled an appointment for the boys to see him. The minister agreed to talk with the boys, but asked to see them individually. Good thinking. The 8-year-old went to meet him first, and the minister sat the boy down and immediately asked him pointedly, "Where is God?" Well, the little boy made no response at all. So the minister repeated the question, but in a bit more stern tone. He said, "Where is God?" Well, once again, the little boy made no attempt to answer. So the next time, the minister stood up, he raised his voice, he pointed his finger in the child's face, and he said, "Where is God?" At that, the boy bolted from the room, out of the church, down the street, ran directly home, into his bedroom, went into the closet and shut the door. So his older brother watched this whole thing unfold and followed him right into the closet, and he said, "What happened?" And the little boy said, "We are in big trouble. We are in big trouble this time. God is missing, and they think we did it." So prayer is not the act of overcoming God's absence or reluctance to produce, but it's an active acceptance of God's highest willingness. Prayer is a communion with the infinite. You've often heard me refer to it as a partnership, having a conversation with your partner. It's a conscious commingling of our thought with infinite spirit. As we come to realize God as an indwelling presence, our prayer is naturally addressed then to this presence within us. So the word by which we call our spiritual practice is far less important than the act of communicating with the infinite. I believe that the main reason that we use the term spiritual mind treatment in Science of Mind is to eliminate any association with what we may have learned earlier in our religious training about pleading, bargaining, or lobbying with a far-off, ill-tempered, moody, vindictive creature who might answer some requests and not others. So let's go back then to the question of the day. Does prayer really change anything? Do you really have to hang upside down on a telephone pole in order to be heard? Is God available to some people and not others? Or for some problems and not others? Well, Eric Butterworth, in his book, The Universe is Calling, suggests to us that the kind of spiritual work we do, which causes us to sense an awakening to a new insight into God and ourselves, is the kind of prayer that changes us. He describes it as the recognition that when we reach that point in consciousness, that we pray from that recognition of our connection, rather than to someone or to something else. That is the affirmative prayer that we call spiritual mind treatment. Your prayer, my friends, is not for God to listen to. True prayer, spiritual mind treatment, are the words that God utters by means of you, by means of me, the words that we voice or feel in the silence. Because as we pray, we don't cause God to spring into action. We're hearing the call of the universe and responding to it. It's in those moments that we feel direct contact with Spirit. And those are calming, peaceful moments. In this type of prayer, we establish a consciousness of God. Not in God, but of God. And then project it by means of speaking our word. We're not changed because we think a different thought. We're changed as we realize our true connection with universal power. We cannot live a new thought or even think one as long as we're clinging to old ones. We must be open to that divine flow that rushes and streams into us from the entire universe. We must be able to let our prayer speak through us, from us. When we decide to pray, we also commit to decide to show up and pay attention. Now, here's an example of what I'm not talking about. And I've told this story before. It may sound familiar to you. There was this philosophy professor at a large university who was too ill to teach his course. But he didn't want his students to miss out on their coursework. So he audio taped his lecture, and he sent it in to be played during the class time. Well, the experiment went so well, actually, that when the professor began to feel better, he decided to just tape all of his lectures and send them in, even though he was feeling better. So after several weeks of this, he decided that, maybe he ought to show up. Maybe he ought to actually attend the class and give the lecture live. However, when he arrived in the lecture hall, he found an empty classroom with 180 tape recorders all set to record his talk. So you see, your prayer work, your spiritual practice is a learning experience. Your commitment is to show up for it, just like you expect the universe to be present and participating when you speak. Your commitment is to be listening with your whole being as your own words and thoughts are being formed. This is why I encourage everyone to do their treatment work out loud, so your ears hear your voice. It's the voice of God speaking by means of you. That's why you recognize it, because it's your voice. And while we offer daily treatments and affirmations in the Science of Mind magazine, it's also important that you speak your own words in treatment, that you create your own affirmations, that you're not just parroting what someone else put on paper a month or 6 months ago, but something that comes live from you in the process of this conversation that you're having with your source of being. These are acts of showing up. These are acts of being present with Spirit, of claiming that which you intend to change or continue or release in your life. Our use of the law of mind, that law which states there is one mind, that mind is God's mind, that mind is my mind now, that's our use of the law that is automatic and unchanging. We use it every time we think. It flows through us because it flows through everything. And since we exist, it must be within and through us. So our choice is not whether or not to use it. It's a given because we're already always using it. Our choice is whether or not to use it correctly, positively, affirmatively, and lovingly. And to use it correctly, we begin by recognizing its constant presence as our own mind and asking ourselves, what am I thinking in this moment? What am I recognizing as my life right now? What am I unifying with in this experience? Like, where am I? Am I fully present? So the short answer to the question, does prayer really change anything? The short answer is yes. But the complete answer is, prayer changes everything. Are you satisfied with what you've created? If not, you can change it. Are you abundantly prospered by what you've created? If not, you can change it. Are you energetic, vital, healthy? Do you feel loved, cared for, supported? If your answer to any of those questions is no, or, well, I'm not so sure, yeah, maybe sort of, you can change that. You can use the law of mind in your prayer work, your spiritual practices, to think only that which you wish to experience, to speak only that which you wish to experience. Create an active, intentional opening within yourself that enables you to recognize Divine Spirit's total presence in every moment, not just 15 minutes a day. As you do this, you develop a higher, broader perception. You give this creative power of Spirit more meaningful, directive expression through your thoughts, through your words, and through your actions. And it's out of this practice of spiritual perception that inspiration comes forth, that new ideas come forth, that change is born. So I invite you today, why not this week? Well, maybe this month, to just simply join me in knowing that this scientific use of prayer, true spiritual mind treatment, is not a technique for getting God, or for getting to God, or for getting God to us. It's about the awareness of our true self in its largest, best possible context. And the key to changing things by altering our own self-limiting attitudes. This type of prayer is the secret door to a cosmic power that is a consciousness rooted in the here and now. We talk about the infinite, and yet what we're talking about is really the consciousness rooted in right here and now, which is the only experience that any one of us individually can have. It's an experience of our own God potential. So know that prayer is not conditioning God with our needs, but conditioning our lives with the limitless activity of God. Prayer is self-realization. Prayer is self-expansion. So know that as you pray from a consciousness of God, everything you intend be changed is. And so it is.